About 2,500 million years ago, the tectonic plate of India split off from the west coast of Africa and drifted away into the open seas. India continued to drift north until it plunged under the belly of the Asian mainland, causing the most massive upheaval on the face of the planet. Like any storyteller returning from a long journey, I spent the months following our expedition attempting to give shape to a series of images, thoughts and feelings. An expedition of this kind is made up of many private journeys, each adding a different perspective to the whole. I decided to make the second episode Michael's story. A Western Buddhist on the trail of an ancient Chinese pilgrim who made a famous pilgrimage to India in search of the Buddha. Our first stop was the ancient oasis known to the Chinese as Kashi, but referred to more frequently as Kashgar by the local Uyghur population. The Uyghurs are an ancient nomadic tribe who settled along the Silk Road over 2,000 years ago. They share with their Turkic neighbours to the west similar racial and cultural roots. The differences we note have more to do with time than place. It feels less like travelling from one country to another than receding very gently into a distant past. Yet Kashgar was not always so isolated. Strategically placed at both the east-west and north-south axis of the Silk routes, it was for many centuries a major conduit for people, goods and ideas. Today, farmers from the countryside and neighbouring oases still flock each week to the great Sunday bazaar. The unloaded carts wait by the Tuman River while their owners sell their wares on the bridge and along the streets of Old Kashgar. At first sight, the bazaar looks like a vast flea market of the general type you might find in India or even in Western cities. In fact, Kashgar might well be the original prototype, for there was once a famous flea bazaar here. So named because it was the section of the market where old clothes were sold. But the real fascination for us are the people themselves. Here is a place where buying and selling and general entertainment are all of a piece. The whole market is a strange mixture of the ancient and the modern, a constantly surprising alternation of the exotic and the mundane. The chai khana or tea shop has its roots in antiquity, but in former times a mandolin player or a storyteller would have held his audience spellbound, rather than Chinese cartoons.
That's number five.
We find Michael, who has been waiting in Kashgar for our arrival, assessing the price of pigeons at the bird market.
How much? €3.
I finally buy a sparrow, but its wings have been clipped, so I guess it will have to sit on my shoulder until I can find someone who wants a pet bird rather than a Chinese supper.
What?
100 years ago, there were better buys to be had in the Kashgar Bazaar than sparrows. George McCartney, the lone British representative in this remote corner of Asia, bought some souvenirs that were to startle the world.
We are walking exactly where it all began, where they found the very first manuscript that made Central Asia such an incredible place for all the art historians and all the excavators and the explorers.
You know, when Eric Shipton came to my house, I think in the 70s, he spoke of this place, and he was speaking like, of a dream. And really, that time, it excited me that if ever I would get a chance to be here, and see, we are here today.
At the turn of the century, Chinabag, as the British consulate was called, served as a strategic listening post beyond the Himalayas for British India in its Cold War against the rapidly expanding Russian Empire. In her memoir of Chinabag, as the British consulate was called, Lady Macartney tells how it became the most famous guest house in Central Asia.
My husband acquired a quantity of broken pottery, stone and metal seals, stucco figurines of Buddha and some 35 leaves of manuscript from native treasure seekers, evidently picked up by them in the desert. He looked upon his acquisitions as mere curios. Nevertheless, he sent them to Professor Hernley, a well-known Sanskrit scholar. What was his surprise when the professor wrote to tell him that these manuscripts were the oldest Indian handwritten documents then known to exist. They were of the 4th century AD. Many scientific expeditions came in consequence, the most important of them being those of our friends Sir Aurel Stein and the late Professor von Lecoq. They excavated a great number of ruined sites around the Taklamakan desert, often at several days' march from any present-day habitation. If any of my readers think I am making too much of the past cultural importance of Turkestan, let him or her go to the British Museum and ask for the Stein collection.
A civilization had emerged, full-blown from the desert, linking for the first time the 4 great cultures of the ancient world: Greece, Persia, India, and China. Stein called it Serindia. He conducted one of the greatest raids on the ancient world that has ever been attempted. His chief source of clues was the travel diary of a 7th century Buddhist pilgrim called Xuanzang. Our local guide escorts us to one of the ancient sites described by Xuanzang, called Moor Temple. It was part of a Tang dynasty town where the pilgrim stopped on his return from India. There, along ramparts, was the stupa of Moor Temple, a domed tower that once held a niche for the Buddha image. Before his arrival, Xuanzang had narrowly escaped death at the hands of bandits. Did he, right here, bow to the Buddha and offer thanks for his deliverance? Next morning, we set off across the desert to Yarkand, the next oasis town over 200 miles away. It is our first taste of the heat and glare and dust of the Taklamakan, which in Turkic means, "He who goes in does not come out." From the comparative comfort of our jeep, I think of Xuanzang and Mark Aurel Stein, traveling this same route when there was nothing but the bleached bones of dead men and animals to mark their way. Like many oases, Yarkand is a green island in an ocean of sand. Fed by a glacial river that descends from the northern wall of the Tibetan plateau, its orchards, fields, and poplar-lined avenues stretch for 70 or 80 miles along the southern Silk Road. History seems to have forgotten Yarkand. Unlike Kashgar, there are few Han Chinese about, and our present century seems to have made little impact. The old caravanserai on Kashmir Street could still be waiting for the Silk Road traders to arrive, laden with gold and spices from India. And I can imagine Stein refitting his footsore camels here before setting off in search of buried cities. Stein's caravan left Yarkand in December 1900. It was the first of his 3 great expeditions, spanning a period of 16 years. Following Xuanzang's clues, he excavated a succession of ancient sites. They had exotic names like Miran, Kandalik, and Lulan, and yielded a stream of remarkable relics. His success sparked an international race for the buried treasures of Chinese Turkestan. An ancient civilization preserved in the sand offered up its secrets by the ton. Nearly a century later, Chinese archaeologists continue to find new evidence for one of their earliest cultures. But they are the latecomers. By 1930, a whole chapter of history had already been carted off to foreign lands. Stein was branded a foreign devil who had stolen China's past, and he was refused permission to conduct a 4th expedition. Stein died in 1943. With his discoveries safely locked away in the British Museum, the man himself was conveniently forgotten. There is one place, however, where he is still given credit for his achievements: India's National Museum in Delhi. The British Raj co-funded Stein's expeditions and were entitled to half of everything he found. As a result, India inherited an impressive collection of Central Asian art. And in these rooms, Serindia finally comes to life for me. Stein's discovery of such lost languages as Kharosthi, Sogdian, and Brahmi show how the once vibrant Buddhist culture of Central Asia had spread from India, and how it evolved after coming into contact with Chinese, Persian, and ancient Greek cultures along the Silk Road. The art, literature, and artifacts he brought back are among the earliest examples anywhere in the world. Stein was a brilliant Orientalist. He turned to exploration to confirm his theories on the evolution of ancient Buddhist culture. Recalling his discoveries, my heart skips a beat as we approach our first sand-buried city. 22 miles south of the present-day Hotan is the ancient capital of Melekowat. Aside from the chance for a little unexpected exercise, it's a disappointment. The Chinese are supposed to have dug up an imperial hall and a collection of Tang Dynasty pottery here, but all I can see are bits of old wall which might easily be mistaken for boulders. It's the desert wind that really fires my imagination. The same dry wind that suddenly swallowed up an entire epoch.
To see perfectly preserved bodies that have been buried in the sand for thousands of years. This woman looks as if she's almost alive. Where did she come from?
这从哪个时代来的呢？是唐朝的。It's from 6th century before Tang Dynasty.
6th century.
Yeah.
6th century means that this woman has been buried in the sand, just like she is, for 1400 years.
Yes.
With her shoes on and her clothes, just as she are, and her hair.
Yes.
It's extraordinary.
Yes.
And this is her 9-year-old daughter. So you can see her hair. Were they Buddhist?
他们是佛教徒吗？
佛教徒。
Yes, they are Buddhist.
That's amazing. It's like looking at Xuanzang and thinking about the journey that he did from China to India to pick up the manuscripts. Here are real people of his time, perfectly preserved. It's fantastic.
South of Hotan, overlooking the Karakash River, are the meditation caves of Kyrgyzstan. Over the centuries, they have provided religious refuge for the followers of many different faiths. Just when I thought that the trail of Xuanzang had gone cold, and there was nothing more to learn about him, the Silk Road has begun to offer up new insights. The Buddhist scriptures discovered in this cave date from the time of Xian, a 3rd century pilgrim who inspired Xuanzang's own journey. It's hard to believe that they remained here undisturbed for nearly 1700 years. Yet the peaceful stillness of Kyrgyzstan offers a glimpse of eternity. There are few distractions, no sense of time rushing by. On the spot where a Nestorian monk would have prayed to Jesus or a Chinese pilgrim meditated, a Muslim woman now invokes the name of Allah. Prayer beads are an ancient aid to meditation used in each of these spiritual traditions. Counting beads is a way of emptying the mind of disturbing thoughts, the first step in any spiritual training. A clear mind, it is said, produces a calm heart. Then death itself can be faced without fear. If sand is the messenger of death, water is the angel of life in the desert. When there is no rainfall, water is more precious than gold. Everything requires water, even the houses. Courtyards and mud brick walls need to be washed down every day, or the dry air will quickly reduce them to dust. On this daily water-giving ritual rests the entire history of civilization along the Silk Road. The day we arrive, the family are harvesting their apricots, and my interpreter and I are invited to pick our own basketful of fruit. I ask her if we should offer to pay, but Guli, whose name means desert flower, says it would be insulting. It is the Uyghur way of wishing us a pleasant journey along the Silk Road. In the small country villages outside Khotan, oral traditions survive which preserve the memory of the Silk Road in a very vivid way. The head of this village is a well-known Nagara drummer who relives the history he heard as a child in the songs and lyrics he now performs for others.
We understand that Xuanzang came many centuries ago and was greeted by the king of Khotan, who played just this sort of instrument for him. And all the people came round, and there was much dancing and singing. Do you know that story?
Biz azır alal bağdan keldik. Burun hem de şu Xuanzang degandan bu Khotan kelganda şu padişah, Khotanın padişahı şu alal bağ degan yerde şu Nağırxanda Xuanzang'ın aldığı şu naqşı usul bilan şu jiq adamlar nağırçalıb kütüb degan. Siz şu işni anlap baqqanmı?
Anlagan. O vaqtının özüdə şu da hazıqı bugünkündəki padişahın özümü bir yerdə.
The Nagara is an ancient instrument that has been passed down from generation to generation. The Nagara was played whenever the king had something important to tell the people. It could be a festival, or it could be an accident, or some other emergency. The Nagara was a signal for people to gather together. Some people say they have heard the sound of drums coming from the temple of the Nagara at night. It was a holy place where many Buddhist priests lived.
In ancient times, it would have been called the Temple of the Ganta, after the drum that called monks and laymen to prayer. In his diary, Xuanzang recounts the legend which gave the temple its name. In the days before Buddhism came to Central Asia, a king discovered a disciple of Buddha in deep meditation. Hearing of the man who had conquered birth and death, the king wanted the Buddha to appear before him. The disciple told him to build a temple on this spot. The king complied and then asked again to see the Buddha. The disciple replied, "Let the king exercise true faith, and he will appear." At that moment there descended from the air a figure of the Buddha, who confirmed the king's faith and gave him a ghanta drum for his temple. And so the collective memory of an ancient people continues to be passed down from generation to generation. Leaving the main expedition for a few days, we fly to Xian in the heartland of China. The Silk Road ends here among the rice paddies of Shanxi province. In Xuanzang's time, these fields lay within the walled city of Chang'an, the imperial capital during the Tang dynasty. The tombs of the Tang emperors are grouped on a hillside outside of Xian. A party of headless ambassadors, known only by the foreign names on their backs, reflects the cosmopolitan flavor of an era that represents the best in Chinese art and culture. In the 7th century, Chang'an was the gateway for all the new ideas arriving along the Silk Road. In the market quarter of Xi'an, a modern statue commemorates the starting point of the ancient caravan route. Traders brought their goods here from Central Asia and beyond, exchanging them for iron, gold, silk, and the newly popular tea. The bell tower stands at the center of the Tang dynasty city where Xuanzang returned after his 10,000-mile pilgrimage to India and back. Although Xi'an is a major industrial center, its historic sites attract tourists from around the world. Today, its 2 million inhabitants are no greater in number than they were in the year 645, when Xuanzang's caravan arrived laden with books, images, and holy relics. The people of Chang'an had heard of his incredible voyage to distant, far-off places, and they poured out of their houses to welcome the Buddhist master whose adventures had already become legendary. Xuanzang is a folk hero in China, and his wild goose pagoda in the Temple of Great Goodwill is a famous landmark. The emperor, Caizong, built Xuanzang, this stone tower, to house his manuscripts. Here, the pilgrim spent the last years of his life, translating them with a team of hand-picked scholars. The new corpus of Buddhist teachings was destined to have an immense impact on all the cultures of the Far East. Moved by the reverence still shown this remarkable man, I pay my own respects in the traditional manner. The emperor was a Confucian and had been hostile to Buddhism as a young man. But in his later years, he took a deep interest in this new religion. Xuanzang became the emperor's spiritual advisor and used his influence to strengthen the position of Buddhism in China. During the Tang dynasty, new and distinctly Chinese forms of Buddhism emerged. Xuanzang's own sect lasted a mere 70 years after his death, but his translations influenced many schools which have survived to this day, including the famous Chan school, which traveled to Japan, where it became known as Zen. The Temple of the Flourishing Teaching is a 7th century monastery to the south of Xian. Its monks and lay followers still chant the original Sanskrit verses brought back from India by Xuanzang and honor his memory by circling the tower that holds his ashes. Inscribed on his tomb is the word Tripitaka, or threefold basket, which refers to the original core of Buddhist teaching. Tripitaka became the nickname for Xuanzang. At 27, he set out on his pilgrimage and did not return until he was 43. Unconvinced by the translations then available in China, he sought the true teaching of the Buddha from the Holy Land of India. He walked alone into the great unknown, crossing the world's worst deserts and its highest mountain ranges. He faced death many times, and his courage and equanimity impressed kings, bandits, and barbarians alike. He lectured at monasteries and debated with learned monks, and by the time he reached his destination, his reputation as a great sage had already preceded him. Xuanzang was not the only Chinese pilgrim to visit the homeland of Buddhism, but he was the most important. Like a dead star that keeps releasing energy for thousands of years, he continues to be a valuable source of knowledge and inspiration. The modern state of Bihar contains the main sites where the Buddha lived and taught during his lifetime. With the decline of Buddhism in India, these sites were either destroyed or abandoned. Many centuries would pass before archaeologists and art historians would seek them out again. And like Stein, they would invariably turn to Xuanzang to guide their footsteps. A short distance from the present city of Gaya lies Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha is said to have achieved enlightenment. This sacred site is once more a center for pilgrims from all the different Buddhist countries of the Far East. Western tourists mingle with visitors from Bhutan, Southeast Asia, Japan, and of course Tibet. A few months after the expedition is over, my wife and I arrive in India to see where Xuanzang's long pilgrimage had led him. We're coming around to the Bodhi tree, just around the corner here.
There it is.
There it is. You can recognize it by its leaves. I've seen it in so many pictures.
Oh, it's beautiful. Look at the size of it.
This is the 4th Bodhi tree, and it
was brought from Sri Lanka by the Cunningham, the archaeologist who uncovered this place in the late 19th century. What a marvelous tree. Amazing how big it's become. These are the Buddha's footsteps. See how they're painted? Red, saffron colored. And little coins are put here as offerings. Before the Gandhara period, there was no Buddha image. And so the only image of the Buddha was the wheel of life, the fish that was one of his 32 marks of a great man, and his footsteps.
The Buddha was an Indian prince called Siddhartha Gautama, who renounced a life of luxury and privilege for that of a wandering ascetic. Confronted with the bitter reality of life outside his palace gates, he asked whether there could be a way to end all suffering. The beggar women and children at the temple gates are a constant reminder of this pertinent question. But the Buddha was concerned with more than the alleviation of physical poverty. He came to see suffering as a basic human condition, as universal as old age, sickness, and death. It was not a matter of living a sheltered life, or even of extending that opportunity to as many people as possible. The burning issue that made him leave his palace and seek an answer was much deeper. And the more he meditated on it, the more elusive the answer seemed. He studied with the best teachers of his age. For 6 years, he imposed the most severe hardships on himself, until he was emaciated and on the point of death. Yet there was no solution to his problem, so he gave up his austerities and nourished himself until his body was strong again. Then he sat down beneath the Bodhi tree for one final supreme effort, vowing not to get up until he was fully enlightened. Not far from Bodh Gaya is a peaceful valley that seems to have changed very little from the time the Buddha walked here. Having reached the end of his ascetic life, the Buddha bathed in a nearby river.
This is truly one of the most beautiful places that I have ever seen.
Wonderful. I just love watching that little child down there. Did you see? Her mother was putting all the wheat and working very hard, putting it in a big bushel, and the child's playing at it, and then makes a little hat out of the burlap and runs after. Everywhere there are children and animals coming through the village. See the little child down there with the staff?
Yeah. Stopped in time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the way the Buddha must have seen it 2,500 years ago. I mean, what really has changed? I don't know.
Telephone poles.
Yeah, telephone poles. And where is the river?
Just over there. That's where we're going.
Oh, I see.
See the temple? That is where the Buddha met Sujata.
Sujata, the young girl who gave him a bowl of milk. And what was the story?
This must be where he came when he was, during the period when he did his real privations, and he was starving and very emaciated, and he came and sat by the riverbed, didn't he, after he...
That's right. And a shepherd looked after him.
A shepherd looked after him, and then a shepherd girl came with a bowl of milk.
And that was Sujata.
Mm.
Yes. Well, this is still Sujata's valley.
Alone among the world's great teachers, the Buddha never claimed to be more than a human being. His teaching mission lasted 45 years and would yield an enormous body of work. But he summed it up in a single phrase: suffering I teach, and the way out of suffering. One of his first monastic orders was started in a mango grove at Nalanda, later to become the greatest university in Asia. It is the largest of all the ancient Buddhist centers, and a must for any tourist making a tour of sacred sites. Xuanzang spent many months in Nalanda and gives a glowing description of its attractions: lecture halls, libraries, temples, and flower gardens, and above all, the greatest Buddhist teachers of the day.
This place is so well preserved, it's like Pompeii.
Yes, there must have been about 10,000 monks living here at the time of Xuanzang.
Do you think he slept in one of these?
Well, it could be. Although I doubt whether these were the exact same walls. It was rediscovered by General Lord Cunningham in the 20th century. And a lot of these were rebuilt.
And didn't you tell me Xuanzang's teacher had a dream about his coming?
Yes.
A portent.
Portent.
Yeah.
Shilabhadra was the teacher. He was a famous Mahayana teacher, and he was...
And he was here?
Yes, he lived here and taught here. He was the master of Nalanda. And he lived in great pain. He had terrible arthritis. At one time it was so bad that he wanted to simply waste away. And he had this terribly powerful dream which told him not to do such a thing, and that he was going to be the master of a very important Chinese pilgrim. And this pilgrim was going to ask him for the Mahayana teachings.
And it was Xuanzang.
And when Xuanzang arrived and actually came up to him and said, "My name is Xuanzang, and I want the teachings of the Mahayana," or at that time it was called the Yogacara teachings, "and I would like you to be my teacher," Shilabhadra looked up to him and wept.
And so a crucial transmission took place that would help ensure the smooth passage of Buddhism to China and beyond. Buddhism soon disappeared from India, and the timeliness of Xuanzang's pilgrimage became apparent to all. He had followed the footsteps of the Buddha in the Holy Land and within his own heart. He was one of the world's great travelers, but his journey, like that of the Buddha, was principally an inward one. A true disciple, Xuanzang strove earnestly to liberate his own heart, and in so doing became himself a light for others to follow. Light and warmth are two aspects of the liberated, humanized energy. Hence the Buddha is called both the all-enlightened one with the single eye of wisdom and the all-compassionate one with a heart that radiates love. The Buddha never encouraged blind faith or belief in anything that could not be experienced firsthand. The liberated warmth of his heart shone forth, encouraging others to break through their self-delusions and awaken to their true nature. For those inclined to follow him, he taught a middle way between self-indulgence and self-mortification. But the Buddha did not promise deliverance. He said he could only point the way. Everyone had to walk each step of that way, like the great pilgrim Xuanzang, on their own 2 feet.